for lack of a better way of saying it, IVF is an elective procedure. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that, there's certainly people that have a need for IVF, and maybe, personally, I think it could be treated differently.
Whoever thought making a baby could be so hard? Luckily, the fertility journey isn't meant to be traveled alone. Eloise and Jason has helped hundreds of people build and grow their families over the last 15 years, and she's ready to share her insider knowledge and expertise with you. So grab a seat and let's talk fertility and alternative family building in the Fertility Café.
Hello, and welcome to Fertility Café. I'm your host, Eloise and Jason. Health insurance is an important aspect of every surrogacy journey, but for many, it's a topic which inspires confusion. Oftentimes, any one person starting the journey in third party are often taken aback by all of the many insurance options and considerations. Luckily, you don't have to go it alone. There are trusted professionals who have dedicated themselves to offering guidance and specialized policies specifically for surrogacy and egg donation. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Jason Smith, the founder and president of International Fertility Insurance. He and his team now provide hopeful parents as well as agencies the solutions required with unparalleled service. They are passionate about playing whatever role they can and helping with the creation of new families. Jason Smith is the founder and president of International Fertility Insurance, IFI, a leading provider of insurance and services to cover surrogacy and egg donation. He is a frequent speaker to the surrogacy industry on the insurance options for a surrogacy journey. Jason's passion for insurance for third-party reproduction and surrogacy started with his own personal struggle with fertility. He experienced firsthand fertility treatment, early labor, medically ordered bed rest, and the NICU. Prior to launching IFI, Jason had been providing insurance and financial solutions since 2008, matching insurance to the surrogacy journey since 2014. He was the leading writer of life insurance death benefit among over 18,000 agents for several years in a row at State Farm Insurance, where his area of focus was life and disability insurance for surrogates. International Fertility Insurance specializes in surrogate pregnancy and egg donation insurance needs, including IVF complication insurance, surrogate life and disability insurance, surrogate maternity plans, and newborn insurance, as well as a variety of consulting practices, including medical billing management and local or outside monitoring management. Jason's top focal points are high-touch customer service and providing an abundance of education for intended parents, agencies, attorneys, and fertility clinics. Welcome, Jason. Thank you for joining me. Although I shared a bit about your bio, I would like to start off by having you share a bit about yourself first.
Sure. Well, as relates to this business, I've been doing insurance since 2008, and right around 2014, I had a good friend of mine that was struggling with fertility. And actually, even predating that, I had some challenges with fertility back in, 2004 or so. But in 2014, a good friend of mine was about to start his 6th round of IVF. And he and his wife were just really struggling with this. And I was just having a glass of wine with him one night and just started chatting about it. And I said, well, gosh, what would be next? And he said, probably surrogacy. And I knew what that was, but I wasn't really that familiar with it. My dad was an obstetrician and gynecologist, so I had sort of baby making in my blood, but I was sort of had this baby making part of me. And also I was a big life insurance producer with a real large insurance company. So I had life insurance radar on, I guess. And as my friend said this, I said, I wonder if surrogates might need life insurance. And the next day I just started calling surrogate agencies, and over time built, a number of good relationships. And so that's what brought me into it. And then a few years back, decided it was really my passion, and I left the company that I was at and started this company. And I just really enjoy what I do every day. On a personal side, I've got 3 kids of my own. The first real troubled bout with fertility wound up leading to twins. So, yeah. So, thankfully they're now 16, driving and all that. So I know I've seen it from the beginning to the end. Mm-hmm. And and I have all girls at that. So it's
my.
Yeah, I got 16-year-old twin girls. But in that process, I also, we went from not even being able to achieve pregnancy to realizing what the issue was, getting on a fertility medication, and then winding up with twins. And that wound up becoming a very complicated pregnancy that involved several months of bed rest and the NICU and all these things. And it just, while I didn't have a baby through surrogacy, I certainly understand some of the dynamics of pregnancy challenges. So I think that helps a little bit in my day-to-day as well. But just pleased to do this, really have a passion for it. And it's full circle to now be, at a place to be on a podcast with you.
Oh, awesome. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. So I'm going to jump into really my first question because I know that unfortunately, insurance can be intimidating for many people. And I, for one, know way more about insurance than I ever thought that I would possibly know in my lifetime. And I do want to say that, of course, the good news is that when you work with a reputable agency that will take care of the insurance considerations, you hope that agency owner or the people that are in there do have some kind of understanding when it comes to insurance. But we are definitely not the end all be all. And it's more of we know who to go to ask for the information and what we're seeking. So with that, first, let's kind of talk about intended parents and their insurance, because unfortunately, I know that the majority, I know there's 19 states now that have the mandated insurances, but it is not common for intended parents insurance to pay for surrogacy or to pay for egg donation, which typically then turns out to where a lot of the intended parents want the surrogates to use their insurance for surrogacy. So can we talk about the surrogate using her plan to cover the pregnancy for, obviously a surrogacy pregnancy?
Sure. So as I think it out, the two most expensive pieces are the maternity coverage as well as the newborn coverage. And the newborn coverage is usually at least only relevant to international intended parents. Usually, at least, and we can chat about the word usually, but usually when we're talking about someone that's in the United States, usually they can put the baby on their plan. There is an importance in checking in with their insurer and making sure that there's proper coverage and is it in network, out of network, and so forth. But probably the most expensive part of this is the maternity coverage. It applies to every single case. And I think that it's maybe 50% of the time the surrogate's insurance will cover a surrogate pregnancy, and maybe 50% of the time it doesn't. And it's and that's just what we see, right? So we may actually not see all the cases. There might be agencies that know this plan works because we've used it earlier in this year or early in this open enrollment period. And so we already know. So we may not even get that case sent to us to evaluate. But of all the ones that we evaluate, we have a team that does insurance reviews where we're looking for exclusions and liens and so forth. Probably 50% of them cover it. And when they do, it's important to distinguish that it covers basically from let's call it, the confirmation of pregnancy. It doesn't typically cover anything related to IVF. It's, for lack of a better way of saying it, IVF is an elective procedure. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that, there's certainly people that have a need for IVF, and maybe, personally, I think it could be treated differently. But from the insurance company's perspective, it's not the surrogate that's got fertility challenges. It's intended parents, be it naturally or be it that they're two gay men or two gay women, for example, that obviously can't naturally conceive a baby, just with their own sperm or eggs. So it's the IVF itself is not generally ever covered by the surrogate's insurance. But from the point that if her plan does not have exclusions or it does not have exclusions, let's leave it at that. then it will typically cover from the start of pregnancy until the delivery and beyond. So, six weeks postpartum, so forth, is typically also covered by her plan.
And let me jump back real quick and talk about laying out the types of insurance which may be involved in specifically a surrogacy journey. So we already talked about the newborn insurance. What other policies, again, specifically to a surrogacy journey is out there?
Sort of looking at a timeline from start to finish. It starts with the IVF process. We have coverage for the donor for complications of IVF. We also have coverage for the surrogate for complications throughout the IVF process. And those are not to pay for the IVF, but they're for the complications that could result. Then moving on, you've got life insurance for the surrogate, which can either be through a term life insurance policy, or there's also a very specialized surrogate life policy that we offer, which also has some optional coverages like loss of reproductive organs, permanent disability, or coverage for the intended parents for their financial loss. Moving on, you've got surrogate disability coverage. We've got a policy that can cover hospitalization due to complications, as well as a policy that's more specific to surrogate bed rest, whether she's in or out of the hospital. Then we may have mentioned it previously, but not in this much depth. There's maternity insurance. So probably the most expensive and complicated piece of the puzzle. It starts with, or the various ways of doing that would be an ACA policy, Affordable Care Act, that is, policy, or if that's not an option, sometimes her employer-based insurance can cover that. If that's also not an option, we have a choice of either waiting for a specific open enrollment period for an ACA type of plan, or we have a couple different ways to cover her through what I would just say are alternative surrogate maternity plans. We have our own IFI surrogacy maternity plan, which is backed by Lloyd's of London, the world's biggest, strongest specialized insurer, as well as we have a sort of a legacy Lloyd's of London program for that as well. So a couple different routes that are both backed by the same provider. And then there's the newborn insurance that we already mentioned.
Yep. Now, how is the coverage of the surrogates policy assessed?
So we have it reviewed by attorneys and as well as our staff. What we're doing there is we're looking through her policy. It's usually about a 125-page document. And we're looking for key phrases related to surrogacy throughout that document. And so we're looking for exclusions. It can be very cloudy. Sometimes it might look like it's an exclusion, but it's really saying just that. Sometimes it'll be very confusing, like that the difference between covering her being a surrogate versus hiring a surrogate, if that makes sense. So that's a real key piece to really understand well within the documents. We're also looking for liens, and a lien, for anyone that's not knowledgeable on that, is not the same thing as like a lien on your home. It's for lack of a better term, it's like a extra deductible, where if a surrogate is being compensated, it can be up to her full compensation in some states. And in California, where I am, there's a statute that says it's usually a third or a half of her compensation. But nonetheless, we're looking for lien language as well, which allows an insurer, perhaps in a state where they're maybe not allowed to exclude surrogacy, that they can impose this lien, which basically says we'll cover the claim, but only after we recovered whatever she was being paid, for this process. So we're looking for that. We're also looking, if it's an employer plan, we're looking for, is it self-funded? And where this comes into play is self-funded employer plans are basically where the employer is taking on some of the risk. And the employer plans in general have looser language than an ACA plan. The great part about an employer plan is that they're usually subsidized in part by the employer, so they can be very cost effective if this works. But they also have less rules and regulations than the sort of federally run program that is the ACA. And so they they don't have to quite as clearly say whether it covers or doesn't. In fact, it may not even say anything about surrogacy at all. And so then it becomes a question of, do you want to trust it or not? And I think I didn't actually mention it, but another variation of the maternity plan is we have what's called a secondary or backup or contingency plan, which is something that can sit behind these types of situations just in case the plan changes or she moves or she loses her job or any of these things. And all of a sudden she's left without coverage. Then you'd have a sort of backup plan to sit behind it.
So is it more common than not for insurance policies to be found exclusionary? I mean, I know just maybe even 5 years ago, it was very common for us to be able to find a surrogate with insurance through her employer, spouse's employer, that didn't have any exclusions. And more times than not, we could use her plan. But now it's not necessarily the case. So what is your thoughts on that?
I actually surveyed my team ahead of this call. I don't know. We probably have the data, but I don't know. We definitely have the data, and we have every one of our reviews, but I don't know that we've actually tracked it. But a general feeling that was pretty much a consensus amongst multiple people on my team is that it's about 50-50. It's, and I would agree with you. It used to be probably more like 80-20 where, or 75-25 that it would cover. And now it seems like it's waning. And I think that, a lot of the intended parents I talk to about this are very confused because many of them are from other countries where they just get health insurance and it just happens and everything's covered. And, and so they're so confused by this, like, why wouldn't it be covered? And for anyone on, listening to this that has that kind of a question, I would just say from the insurance, it is quite different when you're talking about surrogacy. And this is not to say that surrogacy is an inappropriate thing. I think it's wonderful. It's obviously I'm in this industry, but I think I have health insurance and I am not planning to have another child. And so I'll probably have the same health insurance for 10 years. And so if I need some sort of minor medical procedure, they'll have received my premium year after year after year. But in a case of a surrogacy, I am aggressively trying to get pregnant within months, and I'm creating one of the most expensive things that an insurance company will ever see. There's worse things, maybe cancer or something like that. But aside from that, I mean, this is one of the riskiest situations for an insurer in terms of, the cost. And so where they might get, $1,000 of insurance premium, they're bound to be paying out far more than that on a pregnancy. So it's their goal, I would say, to not have to cover this. And some states allow it and some states don't allow it. And it's just, it's very confusing for people that aren't from America as to why this would be this case. And,
it's confusing for people in America too.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's just international. And to be clear, let's talk real quickly about what is not covered by the surrogate's health insurance. So we know that the preconception portion is not covered by the surrogate's medical insurance, IVF, and so forth. But what other things is not typically covered through her insurance?
Sure. So it's, to be clear, what is covered, I would say in general, presuming that there's no exclusion, would be her maternity care and the delivery and the postpartum recovery. What maybe is and maybe isn't are things like midwives and birthing centers. I think that in many cases they are, but it's important to be aware of that. And even with like specialty plans, some of them will allow it as long as there is a doctor and hospital in the background, just in case, kind of. So there has to be that's an important thing to point out. What's also not generally covered would be genetic testing. So the newborn care. So with the exception perhaps of post-birth order states, which basically means this is just to distinguishing who's the legal guardian, if you will, or parent of the baby that has just been born. Many states have a pre-birth order where the intended parents really truly are the parents at the birth. Other states, it's more of the paperwork has to be filed after the fact. And in theory, in those states, it might be possible that the surrogates insurance might, in theory, cover the baby. Now, some, not to take a standpoint on this, some believe that's a great idea. Others don't. And even if it is the case, they don't want to, try to use her insurance. But yeah, I would say genetic testing, IVF itself, anything sort of experimental in nature, and then the newborn care.
And I would also probably add IVF medications typically.
And
anything
related to the IVF.
Yeah. Or monitoring appointments, clinic procedures, even if she is deemed pregnant while she's at the fertility clinic after the transfer and they haven't released her to the obstetrician, most often her policy cannot be used there. So
right. It's a good way of it. Well, there's probably some exceptions. A good way of thinking of that is as soon as she's released to the OB. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. How often do you see IPs whose surrogate is found to have a reliable policy purchase additional coverage?
Yeah, so we're pretty aggressive. So I say this over and over again, but we're aggressive in educating. We're never aggressive in pushing anything. So we don't ever say, you really, really, really got to have this. It's, and you're a bad person if you don't take this plan. We just try to educate. It's my goal that every single case we work on learns about what we call the secondary maternity plan, or some call it the backup or contingency plan. I think it's really important that people understand the risk and then make their own decision. So our goal would be that all the agencies we work with and attorneys and independent cases, that they all learn about this plan. Whether they buy it or not, it's up to them. And I would say it's probably like 60% due, 65% due, and maybe 40 or 35% don't. But and maybe it's a little higher. But there's some weighting in that. We have some super large agencies that we work with that just buy it on every single case, and it's like a rule that you have to have it. So that probably skews the numbers. But if you take them out of the fold, it might be 60-40 or 65-35 that buy this, and it's just I think we briefly touched on it earlier, but there's a handful of risks, all of which are very unlikely to happen, but they all could happen. Some of the risks I think are greater than others. Like if your plan is going to renew in the middle of the pregnancy, it is a big risk because all you've got is a plan that is guaranteed to work the same way it does until the renewal. At that point, the employer could change the plan. If it's a plan on January 1st, it's up for change, and it could go away completely. It could all of a sudden have exclusions. It could all of a sudden have a lien. We see insurance carriers every year kind of go into certain markets and exit certain markets. So like even right now, I can think of insurance companies that are expanding into 4 more states, 6 more states that last year or this year at least have covered surrogacy. So my assumption is they're going to cover it next year. And so great, 6 more states, they'll be there, but they might just be expanding their network, but all of a sudden putting an exclusion on surrogacy. We don't know yet.
Well, and let's actually talking about the Affordable Care Act and being able to purchase a plan for the surrogates that either don't have insurance or have a policy with an exclusion. And I mean, good thing this year was that the ACA plan had open enrollment twice. Well, it had already had it once already when it opened in March or whatever, and then it ended in August. And then it's going to open back up again in November. And God willing, that will happen again next year because it just made life so much easier.
Sure, yeah.
But let's dive into the ACA plan because I think there is a lot of confusion for people like, okay, I mean, it's a plan that you can just purchase. Why shouldn't we get it all year long? Right. And then there's also this misunderstanding from a lot of people that not all of these plans that are offered will be able to be utilized for surrogacy because there are exclusions in those plans too. And so why don't you touch a bit on the Affordable Care Act and kind of how the pros and cons of purchasing that policy works?
Yeah. So let's just talk about the general timeline, then we'll talk about pros, then cons maybe. So general timeline, typically you can buy it. Typically we start to see plans around the middle of October, and we can start to put people in them usually around the middle of November. There's some variations. Some states are open a bit longer than others, but usually in November and December, we can put someone into a plan, but it will have a January 1st start date. And there are, like I said, there are some exceptions. Some states will go until, say, the end of January or even into the middle of February, perhaps. Some states even longer under certain circumstances. But generally, that's your window. And this year, like you said, was unusual. And with COVID concerns, they kept it open and open and open. I think it was supposed to be until April, then it became until August. And a few states are still open. But in general, in normal years, November, December for a January 1st start date. And again, we talked about it earlier, but people would ask, well, why? Why can't I get it in July or so forth? The idea is that they give you this window so that you don't go without coverage, and then all of a sudden, once you realize you have cancer, buy a new plan, right? Or once you realize you're pregnant, buy a plan, or change your plan. They want you to lock in so the insurance providers can have a set amount of premium to match up with the risks that they're taking. So then the pros and the cons. So the biggest pro of the ACA is it has an unlimited benefit. So when we compare it to the other options out there, typically there's a $500,000 limit on the specialty plans. You can get that increased for additional premium if you want. I think a competitor of ours might have a $250,000 plan, but usually most of them are $500,000, let's say, whereas the ACA plan unlimited. And where that can come into play too is if we're looking at singleton versus like a multiple embryo transfer. The specialty plans are even more expensive, whereas an ACA plan, it really doesn't matter if you have one or 4 babies. If you have, you just increase your complication of pregnancy risk, but you're going to have a maximum out of pocket. If you hit it, you hit it, and it doesn't matter whether you barely exceeded or whether you have $2 million of claims. It's still, your risk is capped, and so that's probably the biggest benefit of the ACA. The cons or the concerns are timing. You've got this short window typically, which means if you want to get pregnant or have a surrogate pregnancy in July, you're kind of out of luck. You really you're gonna have to wait 6 months. And we talk with all sorts of parents, with all sorts of intended parents, that is, with all sorts of circumstances that they're wanting and ready to have a baby as soon as they can, and they don't want to wait 6 months. And so timing is a concern. The other factor that as relates to that is commonly a lot of the agencies will then try to map out the IVF to start to achieve pregnancy right around New Year's. And if you're unsuccessful, then you're going to need a second transfer. And now the second transfer might be 2 or 3 months later. And hopefully that works. If that works, you're probably going to still have your delivery in that same year. If however, your second transfer doesn't work, you're unquestionably, unless you're unfortunate to have a really early delivery, you're going to deliver in the next year, right? And because of that, you don't have a certainty that the plan that you just bought will even exist at the time of your delivery, or it might be surrogate friendly now, but have exclusions that come on. So we're shooting this in 2021 right now, or recording that. But if somebody who's planning on a January 1st pregnancy, let's just call it, of 2022, if a couple transfers don't work, they're going to deliver in 2023, and they don't know that their plan will even be there for the delivery. So that's where you got to have that, or my opinion, it's a good idea to look at that secondary plan. The other thing is the networks. So number one, when we're looking for ACA plans, we're not only looking for exclusions and liens, we're also looking at, is her doctor in network with this plan? Is her hospital in network with this plan? And those networks can change too. And so you might have a doctor and hospital that are real friendly on so-and-so plan, and then the next year they're not. And but you're going to deliver in March.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that's something else you got to consider. And that's where, again, secondary plan is a good idea. So, the big ones are the timing, the renewal concern. Will the plan still be there or not? And then the surrogate moving. Sometimes I talk about this and people say, no, it's in my contract. She's not allowed to move. Life happens. And you could have a super ill parent or get married, get divorced, have your spouse's or partner's job change. And all of a sudden, there's just a really good reason why you need to move from, Georgia to Louisiana. And maybe Georgia is a very friendly surrogacy state, and maybe Louisiana's not. And nobody planned on this move to Louisiana, but just happened. And perhaps now all of a sudden you're without a plan that actually fits any longer. So again, all these are reasons to consider that backup plan, I think. But as long as you know your risks, ACA can be it's definitely the most generous in terms of coverage.
And I would also add too, with the ACA plans, it's not that every insurance company out there also provides those ACA plans. So various states might actually have, a year or 2 years ago where many states really only had 1 or 2 plans to choose from. And then those 1 or 2 plans may have had exclusions. I mean, North Carolina was one of those states that none of the plans a couple of years ago was able to be utilized by a surrogate because every plan that there was in that state had an exclusion.
Yeah, and even down, like I'm in an enormous state, California. Even down to the county level, it can be changing. I mean, I'm in San Diego, and last year or the year before, there was no plans in San Diego that covered surrogacy, but just 30 minutes north of me in Orange County, they did. But it's just, it can be on the state level, it can be on the county level. It's down. We literally look to the surrogate's zip code in terms of what's available.
And then the other thing too that has happened to our surrogates in the middle of a plan or in the middle of a policy, her providers became out of network.
Yeah.
And she had to, we literally had to scramble to find another delivery hospital, another OB, or, all of those things. So that definitely is also something that could happen. Not that it couldn't happen even with a plan through an employer, but I saw that it was occurring more with the ACA plan. Not that it happened often, but it did happen a few times through the ACA plan. So I think that's another negative portion of having that plan. So I developed an online course for intended parents who wish to undertake an independent surrogacy journey called Surrogacy Roadmap. And I do believe that independent surrogacy is the most realistic option for some. And the goal of my course was to provide important guide rails to those who wish to pursue such a journey. And we have an entire chapter on insurance, but I wanted to ask you, what words of wisdom do you have for intended parents who are working without the guidance of an agency? And what should they be especially aware of when it comes to the insurance?
Wow, great question. So we work with a whole lot of agencies and attorneys that are helping independent cases. And often we even talk to intended parents before they've even chosen an attorney. And I think that it's a very complicated web, the insurance piece of this. And I think that you either need to really have a great resource that maybe has gone through this before, or a good insurance broker, perhaps. But you just really need to be educated. It's and even I would even argue, in working with an agency, make sure that agency seems competent about this. I think there's 2 types of agencies. There's the ones that really, really, really know what they're doing. And then there's others that say, okay, well, I'm going to just, I'm going to release this to the insurance broker and they'll take care of it. And I think you want to at least have a feeling like your agency knows what they're talking about at least. But there's lots of people out there that just can't afford an agency perhaps and are going to go the independent route. And I think you just really need to understand your risks before you just go into this because you're passionate about wanting to have a baby. So like it's great that you've built that course. We have a educational resource library, which is a bunch of videos of me talking about every single product we offer. And I try to update these about every, 4 months or 6 months. And, I think I just would say that you really need to know what you're doing. I can't tell you how many people blindly thought that they read the plan themselves and they didn't see surrogacy specifically excluded. And so they just think it's going to work, and I think like we really try to not have people pay money for they don't need to. If we know that something's not needed, we'll tell them, but like, it's just worth it to get an insurance review, for example. It's worth it to spend the time. Maybe it's not even a cost, but just like the time value, but to talk to someone like myself or even our competitors and ask these questions. Really, like, I don't know, everything you just talked about in this podcast, like everything's relevant and then some, and I just think that there's a lot that, it's not every time that we get, hey, how much will all of these things cost? Can you give us like a full cost of everything? But when you add it all up, it's even if you're lucky enough that your surrogate's insurance will cover, it's still expensive.
Yes.
And I think that some people just don't really understand. You asked me the question about all the different types of insurance, and there's like 5-6 categories, and they're all relevant.
Yes, they're all relevant. And I would also add to the fact that, especially when people are doing independent surrogacy, they automatically assume, oh, she has insurance, so I'm just going to go ahead and utilize her insurance. And what people don't really understand is just because she has insurance and she's been able to use her insurance for her own pregnancies, surrogacy pregnancy is different than your own pregnancy. So just because she was able to use her plan for her policy or it's through her employer or whatever, doesn't mean that it's always going to be covered. And a lot of times too, people that are doing independent surrogacy may work with somebody who has Medicaid or Medicare. And I am one that I completely disagree with somebody using a government provided policy to use that for surrogacy. And just to be clear, the ACA or the Affordable Care Act is a matter of fact. Can you kind of break that down, the difference between Medicare, Medicaid, and the ACA plan? Because I think everybody kind of lumps them up and says, oh, okay, they're all government insurance. So, what's the difference?
Yeah. So I would also throw like veterans insurance in there as well as like a similar but different category where it's Medicare or Medicaid or Medi-Cal, or there's a handful of different things that are basically the same thing, which is basically like it's a low income or no income option for people, the American citizens that for whatever reason are at a lower income level. And it is a way to provide health insurance for everyone, similar to how many of our international clients may have, but it's not intended to be there for the benefit of someone else. It's for the benefit of the insured, the low income person. It's not for her to then use that insurance for the benefit of others. Whereas, so that's similarly, we have veterans plans that are for folks that have worked, for as Army, Navy, Marines, so forth, Air Force, and or other government branches, perhaps, and they also may get a benefit of a insurance plan that either is completely provided for them or at a substantial discount based on their years of service, and maybe they were injured in their work capacity or something like that. These plans are intended to be a way for this person to have insurance. It's not for this person to act on behalf of someone else and incur a large medical bill on behalf of someone else, which is what they're doing in surrogacy. Whereas the ACA is also government sponsored, you might say. It's government regulated, but that's the word government is the end of the difference of the similarity here. It's just putting some structure behind health insurance for Americans, trying to create a good environment for Americans to not be taken advantage of by the insurance companies, perhaps. So it is that's really the difference. Is and I guess you could argue that that's not really intended to use for the benefit of others as well. But the difference is that, generally speaking, the surrogate is paying actual insurance premium to these providers, whereas on a Medicare, Medicaid, Medi-Cal plan or other similar different name but same idea around the country, it's often free or being either completely or very close to completely provided by the government.
Right. It's definitely not subsidized where, I know for all of the surrogates that we work with that get the ACA plan, it's a pretty penny premium that they're paying, as well as the maximum, out of pocket that they also have to cover. So it's not like, they are getting the plan and it's free and no, you're paying a full premium, just like you would if you had an employer and you had to, contribute to your plan as well. So it's unfortunately
it's thousands of dollars, and these insurers have taken into consideration surrogacy, and they've either decided to include it or not, and they based their premiums probably around that. So whereas on a Medicare plan, it's generally free, and it's not really big. It's not made for surrogacy.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we've spoken mostly about surrogacy journeys, but let's quickly speak about how insurance comes into play for egg donor journeys.
Yeah, sure. So again, if we go back, the egg donor, and we have a similar plan for surrogates as well, which is almost, I think, important to mention in this little part here. But the egg donor, so she's acting on behalf of others. She's not the one that is having fertility challenges to overcome. She's just doing this for the benefit of others. So generally speaking, her insurance won't cover her. There's no insurance really that will cover the cost of anything IVF related. There's very few employer plans that might do something, or there's some employer sponsored situations where you can hire somebody to do these things, but generally speaking, her insurance won't cover it. And some of the potential risks are ovarian hyperstimulation or OHSS, ovarian torsion, allergic reaction to her medication, bleeding, cramping, nausea. And so the way I like to put it whenever I'm talking about this is right now as we talk, it's 11:55 here in the middle of the day. If I was a donor and I felt I didn't feel well right now, and if my clinic was nearby, I might either go to the clinic or call the clinic and say, hey, I'm not feeling well. What's going on here? But if it was 12 hours later and it's almost midnight, clinic's not open, and I don't feel right. Maybe this is my first time doing this and I have no idea why I'm feeling the way I am. So I'm going to go to the emergency room, and I may or may not be admitted and hospitalized and so forth. And these can be expensive bills. And so we have an insurance coverage that's called egg donor complications insurance. And it's very, very inexpensive. And we have coverage anywhere from $100,000 to $1 million. Most people choose $250,000. Doesn't mean that that's the right number, but most of the, I think in general, these claims aren't normally huge, but some of them can be. I know of one that was, 6 figures, not too long ago. But even a $20,000 bill is a huge bill. And that's what this egg donor coverage is for. And we have a similar coverage, just to tie it all together in the same breath. The for the surrogate that would cover similar things like, allergic reaction to medication, ectopic pregnancy, ectopic rupture, abdominal pain, cramping, so forth. Mm-hmm. So, these are both sort of IVF related, but your question was about egg donor, but
yep.
I don't know, too passionate.
Yes, no, I love it. Absolutely. So I'm curious, and I know every time I even think about it, I get irritated with myself about COVID because it has been the topic of everything these last couple of years, and I'm so over it. But it is what it is, and it's part of life right now. How has the COVID pandemic affected the field of third-party reproductive insurance?
Yeah, so real interesting question. It was. Gosh, I'm not going to even make that analogy, but it was like everything just came to a standstill all of a sudden. And for a minute, I was like, wow, this is nice to have a little break. But then you realized, wait a minute, this whole industry is shaken up for a minute. And, clinics shut down, maybe on their own choice, out of safety for their workers, maybe because they were forced to, because it was just considered not to be a essential business, like a supermarket. None of the supermarkets shut down because you got to go get your food. Mm-hmm. But in the government sphere, you didn't have to go get fertility treatment, mm-hmm. and so everything was shut down. Thankfully, it seemed to me like it was maybe a few months where it was really, just at a standstill, and then it started to come back in. But where I think the bigger impact is that this is a global industry, global wonderful thing that surrogacy is. Probably 50% or something of the business is international parents coming to have a baby in America. Through surrogacy, and it's just recently, frankly, that the travel has opened up. I mean, it's probably 6 months ago or 9 months ago, but the clinics were closed for a bit, but then the ability to even be able to travel to come here really shut down for a while. I pray that we've gotten through it enough. You've got vaccination rates extremely high here, and in many other places it's similar, it'll just continue to hopefully get better and better in terms of vaccination rate. And I think this is not a statement on vaccinations, but mm-hmm. I think if we can maintain that and increase that, then hopefully this shouldn't be an issue. I mean, I've got a trip booked to Europe 2 months from now, and I think it's happening. So, and that just couldn't have happened 12 months ago. So, yeah.
Yep. What about for surrogates and egg donors that get COVID? For these policies and all these insurance plans that we're talking about, whether it's the ACA or, all these other plans, will they cover them if they get sick?
So great question. And it's been a hot topic lately. And so ACA plans, yes. Term life insurance plans, yes. Although to my awareness, there hasn't been a surrogate that died of COVID. And I sure hope that there never will be.
Yes.
But I know there's been concerns, and there certainly has been cases where surrogates got COVID. I think that just from the health perspective, it might be a good idea in these times that the surrogate have a health plan, even if it's got exclusions. So, for example, they might have. There are cases where you can have. There are situations where you're allowed to have two health plans. The term that is important is called coordination of benefits, and it's important that the surrogate or the agency look into Plan A. Will Plan A that she has right now allow a Plan B as well? If so, then maybe she can keep her, for example, employer plan that doesn't cover surrogacy, and then take out an ACA plan that does. And then maybe you've got the surrogate journey covered by Plan B, but you've got COVID this is a bad example because the ACA would have covered either way. But a different version, let's say there's no ACA plan and you take a specialty insurance plan for the surrogate pregnancy. To round out the question, a lot of the specialty plans will not cover COVID. And it's something that I'm, even yesterday, I sent a note asking, again, to try to see if that could be something that's resolved, maybe for a fee, maybe for lower amounts, whatever the case is. I am certainly pushing to see if any reform can happen there. But historically, those plans have not covered, they're built for covering pregnancy, and they're built for, on the life plans, for example, they're built, life insurance plans, they're built for covering sudden events. They're not built for covering slow moving illnesses like cancer, for example. And all of a sudden this COVID that has come in out of nowhere is most similarly related to something like that. It's an illness. It's not like you just suddenly, had a big event happen. So it's definitely, when your question about what should independent cases think about, it applies to people that are working with agencies as well, understanding what covers this, what covers that. But I think a safer bet is just in this, even over this next year or whatever it is, until we hopefully get rid of this thing, that she has some insurance, which maybe doesn't cover the pregnancy, but will cover the COVID.
Mm-hmm. Any last words of wisdom for egg donors, surrogates, intended parents, or any other audiences regarding insurance?
I think we touched on it, but I'll just sort of reiterate it. We work with a lot of agencies, and I don't think it's important whether they're big or small. I think it's important that they have a passion for this, that it's not just a business to them, that it's not about the numbers and, that they did 100 cases this year. I think that it's just super clear to me that there are people in this business that really believe in it and work hard and get educated themselves and so forth. And then there's others that don't. Mm-hmm. And I would just, I don't know that you need to talk to 10 different agencies or anything like that, but I think it's important that you don't stop until you found one that you really think, knows what they're talking about, has experience, because it matters. I think that we sit in the backdrop and we try not to play any favorites or anything like that, but we definitely hear of agencies that people love and you can just tell even in the interaction. You don't have to hear it from the intended parent. You can hear it. You can just, you can see the, how involved the agencies are. And I just think it matters. And so it's the same thing, whether you're independent or working with an agency. Just do your homework, really understand all the aspects of the insurance. If you don't, feel free to ask me, and we'll certainly, we have, like I said, you don't even have to work with us. You can get, our videos and review them. And, depending where you're at in your journey, they'll either be ready and relevant now or relevant, to at least paint the picture for you. But just get educated and work with someone that seems really passionate about this as well.
Awesome. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and I'm certain our listeners have learned a great deal from you, and we'll be sure to have all of your information in our show notes.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you. I hope you found this discussion helpful as you weigh your next steps. We would love for you to rate us. So if you haven't yet, go to your listening platform of choice and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. You can follow Fertility Café on its Instagram and Facebook channel at Family Inceptions. We'd also love you to share Fertility Café with friends and family members who would benefit from the information shared. Join us next week for another conversation on modern family building. Thank you so much for joining me today. Remember, love has no limits. Neither should parenthood.
Thank you for joining us in the Fertility Café. Whether you're an intended parent, a woman considering egg donation, thinking of becoming a surrogate yourself, or a friend or family member of someone dealing with infertility, we're here to help. Visit our website, thefertilitycafe.com, for resources on fertility, alternative family building, and making this journey your own.